Whatever you think about The Rise of Skywalker, it is one of the most hated on Star Wars movies that there has ever been, and personally it ranks very low in my personal Star Wars ranking. I think it's bottom 2, so that means that there's a lot that I would want to change about The Rise of Skywalker, and that's exactly what this video is going to be about. So first off, I just want to say I'm not going to be crafting a whole new script for The Rise of Skywalker, because one, I'm trying to prove that it was so close to being a genuinely really good movie, so I'm only going to be changing a few things here and there to just make it so much better. And two, if I was going to craft a whole new script, it would simply be Colin Trevorrow's script, because I think that is simply a 10 out of 10. Now if you don't know what that is, you can simply search it up for yourself, but I highly recommend you find out what it is. But anyway, let's get straight on with it. So we start out the movie seeing Kylo Ren on Mustafar, and a lot of people don't actually realise it's Mustafar, and that's understandable because the planet went over many changes, as we learn in the Vader Immortal VR games, which Star Wars Theory has done a playthrough on, so I highly recommend that you go and watch that if you're not going to purchase the game for yourself. And this is actually one of my favourite scenes in The Rise of Skywalker, but at the same time it's one of the ones I have the biggest problem with because it is so wasted. The majority of it is in slow motion. We hardly see any of Kylo's ability and power when he's fighting these guys. He hardly uses the Force in this fight, at least visually. Obviously he's using it whilst fighting, but he's not doing a Force crush or something, say Luke did when he had his tunnel scene or his hallway scene in the Mandalorian finale. It's also not really explained why he's actually there, and in the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker, that whole scene and that whole subplot is explained much further. So I'm going to extend that part of the story, telling us why he's actually there, and we're going to show him in Vader's castle searching for the Sith Wayfinder after he fights off the people outside Vader's castle on Mustafar, which is the scene that we see. And yes, I mentioned Exegol, so I'm keeping Palpatine in this movie, and I'll explain how that's different later. And then about the fight scene that he has before he goes into Vader's castle, obviously I mentioned how I didn't like the slow-mo, so we're going to change the amount of slow-mo from 90% slow-mo, 10% not, to probably 75% not, 25% is slow motion, and we're going to extend the fight to make Kylo seem much more powerful and it just be a better scene overall, because fight scenes don't just make a movie better. There's plenty of movies that have good fight scenes that are bad movies, but they certainly are entertaining, so I'm extending the length of it, and that already makes The Rise of Skywalker more enjoyable to watch in my opinion. While in Vader's castle, I'd also like to see a lot of callbacks and Easter eggs to what Vader was doing when he was alive in his castle, and something that I'm going to nab from Colin's script is going to be a hologram message from Palpatine speaking to Vader, speaking about Exegol, which I think will be very good. Now we'll move out of chronological order because why not, and we're going to change up one of people's biggest problems with The Rise of Skywalker, and that is going to be the dagger. Now I'm not going to get rid of the dagger because that would change the storyline way too much, because if there was no dagger, then they don't end up going to that moon, they don't meet the other ex-stormtroopers, there isn't that fight with Kylo where he is redeemed because Leia sacrificed herself. So we're still going to include the dagger, but what's different is it doesn't have the Sith writing saying where to stand on this moon to look upon where the other Sith Wayfinder actually is. No, it's going to have the coordinates to the Sith Wayfinder. I think that makes so much more sense, because think, what if a big piece of the Death Star that was part of it being lined up fell off? Well, all of a sudden it doesn't match up anymore, despite that actually being where the Wayfinder is. So to fix that, they can simply just write the coordinates of where the Wayfinder is within the ruins of the Death Star. I think that makes way more sense. It can still be written in Sith dialect, and then we go to Kijimi with Babu Frick and C-3PO getting the stuff done to him, but what's written on the dagger is changed, and I think something small like that makes it much better. Now let's cut straight to the next one. Finn and Rey would have been a good couple. They just would have. They were so pushed for in The Force Awakens. It was definitely hinted that something was going to happen between those two, and even in The Last Jedi, although it didn't progress their relationship all too much, you definitely could have seen it going somewhere in The Rise of Skywalker, and it just didn't. So it's going to. So how it's going to change is when Finn and everyone is sinking after they get chucked into that, I don't even know what it is, some kind of quicksand. I know it's not quicksand, it was little black beads. He ends up shouting "I love" and then is cut off by sinking down. So when they sink down into the caves, they are actually a bit more separated. So when Rey asks Finn what he was going to say, he tells her that he was going to say that he loves her. Finn continues to ramble on whilst Rey just stares at him, and eventually she cuts him off from what he was saying, says how she loves him back, and the two kiss before C-3PO interrupts them just like he did to Han and Leia. A nice little callback to The Empire Strikes Back, and just linking it all a bit more together. And as George Lucas says, it's like poetry, it rhymes. Something as simple as this can help remind us that we are still in the same universe as the original trilogy, despite Han and Luke already being dead and the main characters being completely different. And now that we changed up the dagger storyline, we'll bring ourselves back to that moon where they were initially on because of the dagger, where we go on to Finn again because he's going to do something very different here. He chases Rey as he is fighting Kylo, but this time he is alone, not with the other deserter stormtrooper, that girl. And whilst we're on the topic of Rey fighting Kylo, that fight scene is just better. The way that I'm changing it is it's just better. The both of them seem much more skilled in their dueling and seem more powerful, because if anything, their dueling skills seem to have degressed since The Force Awakens in this movie rather than progressed, which is especially concerning considering there has been a year time jump between episode 8 and 9. So that fight scene, in my opinion, was just not very good. They both looked really bad. So I'm going to change that by simply making them look like better duelists. So Kylo is obviously better than Rey in The Rise of Skywalker, but the difference between the two is even greater in this movie, and he ends up knocking out Rey in their fight, and she drops her saber in the process. This leads to Finn force pulling the lightsaber to himself, revealing that he is force sensitive, and also gives us a Kylo versus Finn rematch, which I really wanted to happen. What I said a minute ago about Finn and Rey gives Finn further reason to chase Rey rather than just to shout her name. And Leia actually knew that Finn was force sensitive, and during the time of the year gap between episode 8 and 9, Leia gave Finn some very basic lessons, just like Luke on the journey to Alderaan. So he wasn't very good, but he knew much more about the Force than he did in The Rise of Skywalker that we got, and it's actually revealed that he is Force sensitive rather than just hinted at. And he did these lessons with Leia whenever he wasn't out on missions fighting with Poe, which admittedly wasn't too often, which is why he isn't going to win this fight, because he didn't have too many lessons. However, you can see a clear difference between his ability in The Force Awakens to now, something I think was lacking with Kylo and Rey, like I said. Finn defends a few of Kylo's attacks really well, but at the end of the day, Rey is better than Finn and Kylo is considerably better than Rey. But Rey wakes up and sees that Finn is struggling, so Force pushes Kylo back, meaning that Finn and Rey both now stand in front of Kylo, obviously Finn being closer, but they are both in front of him. Now this is where Kylo steps up a gear and absolutely destroys the both of them, sending Finn into the water and then having Rey on her knees, and the events play out just as they did in The Rise of Skywalker, with Kylo going to attack. Leia steps in, and you know what happens from there. Rey stabs him, then she force heals, and then she goes to Exegol in Kylo's TIE Fighter. Now whilst this happens, Finn manages to get back to Poe and the crew by climbing up out of the water, because he was knocked into the water, not knocked out and then into the water. Oh, and also the vision of Han changes to the ghost of Anakin, which I think it always should have been that. And the next one is quite boring, and it's simply just a disclaimer saying that if I don't say that anything changes, then simply assume that maybe I've forgotten it, or most likely it will stay the same in my story of The Rise of Skywalker. Now there is some tiny changes that I would make to scenes, like making them shorter, making them longer, but they're not worth talking about, so I'm not going to mention them. Now let's completely mess up the order of events in this video and skip right back to Rey running the training course. Now that scene was really good in my opinion, but it can be better. Now the training course is actually going to be longer. Like I said, I enjoyed the scene, so I would want to see more of it, and it's actually going to be a bit more challenging, and Rey is also going to do a bit better. Like I said, she's a better duelist and more powerful in this version of The Rise of Skywalker, so she's not going to struggle to kill one of those dummy droids. But yeah, other than that, that scene was pretty good. Now one piece of criticism that I never really understood about The Rise of Skywalker until deep diving into it, like I've done in this video, is saying that it was trying to erase some things that we learned in The Last Jedi. Now I know that that piece of criticism is valid when I think about Kylo Ren's appearance. He does not rebuild his helmet in this version of The Rise of Skywalker. What is the point? After he bashed up his helmet in The Last Jedi, it kind of seemed like he was changing and wanted to show his face all the time, and then we cut to The Rise of Skywalker and he's made the exact same mask but a little bit cooler because it's red. So he's not going to do that. He's going to be showing his face throughout the whole of this movie, which I think is better. You get to see a bit more of Adam Driver's acting ability, or you would have if it was done in the first place, and he's an incredible actor, so even just different facial expressions would change a lot about a lot of scenes. Now speaking of that, Snoke is someone that comes up very often in that criticism, so we're going to talk about Snoke now, and that brings us to Exegol. Just completely erase the multiple Snokes that are kept in tanks on Exegol. Just get rid of them all. I feel like Snoke should be an anomaly rather than there being multiple like similar versions of him. Like, he was a failed attempt at making the Palpatine body. He had his own consciousness, although he was partially controlled by Palpatine, but he was his own separate person. So he was a failure. They didn't make a clone body for Palpatine to take over. They basically made a whole different person. So I don't get why all the other bodies in the tanks would be so similar to this failure. Yes, I understand they successfully made a Force sensitive clone, so they achieved something very, very good, but they also failed something very, very big in the process, as they made a different person, not a body to be taken over. So I get that each experiment may only change slightly from the last with the Snoke experiment, as they did successfully make a Force sensitive body, but then it's not small changes that are needed. You made a new person basically. So I think yes, some could look like Snoke, but I think each thing in the containers or in the Bacta tanks or whatever they are should look slightly different from the other, and there should be a few that look really, really different. I also think that it makes Snoke a little bit less interesting of a character if there is multiple versions of him lined up ready to go in this tank, or at least it appears to be that way. I feel like he should be unique. Another random thing that I want to add is that can Richard E. Grant's character just not exist? He is creepy, his dialogue is really, really bad, and the character seems very, very important considering we hadn't seen him in the last two movies, so I just want to erase him from this movie completely. Now, I don't dislike the actor at all. He played classic Loki incredibly in the Loki series, but his character in The Rise of Skywalker just wasn't it. And speaking of the First Order, Hux isn't the spy. That wasn't good. He's not going to be the spy. In fact, it's not going to be revealed who the spy is, and that's going to be a string that they can pull on in the future if they do more sequel covering content. They can tell us who it is nearer to the time. Maybe it's a character we don't even know of yet, but it's not going to be Hux. And speaking of strings to pull on, I would also like to have characters reference things that happened between episode 8 and 9 that we don't know of yet, much similar to Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith, referring to stuff that have happened in the Clone Wars, which we then got to see in the Clone Wars. I definitely think that was something missing from The Rise of Skywalker. Movies that have a time jump from the last one definitely need to acknowledge that there is a time jump from the last one, so if they want to do content covering the gap, they have stuff to build on, and The Rise of Skywalker just didn't provide any of this. And I'm someone that has spoken out many, many times asking for a Clone Wars style show about the Resistance versus the First Order, and it's just harder to make one of those than the Clone Wars because there's nothing to pull on. There's no strings. And I spoke about bad dialogue, so now that brings me to somehow Palpatine returned. Now, I don't actually mind that particular piece of dialogue too much, but that scene I'm not a fan of. I want it to hit harder. The characters' reactions just weren't good enough in my opinion, especially some of the background characters. They just looked like they didn't care at all. I want them to be angry, really, really sad, and look like they genuinely have no chance at winning this war. Not some of them that are just like, okay, yep, that happened. This is the guy that was running the Republic and the Separatists at the same time, wiped out the whole Jedi Order, took Luke Skywalker nearly dying and his own apprentice Darth Vader turning on him to supposedly kill him, and now he's not even dead. The only Force sensitive people they have on their side is Rey and Finn, and no one knows other than Leia that Finn is Force sensitive, so they aren't exactly expecting Rey to do what Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader combined couldn't. So yes, the characters need to react a lot more to Emperor Palpatine, the man who ran the galaxy for years and years, that took way, way more people than that's currently in the Resistance to stop. But anyway, on to the next one. I want R2-D2 to be shown more in this. What I liked quite a bit about The Last Jedi is it actually acknowledged R2-D2 rather than The Force Awakens. He's just shut off and often just sad about Luke leaving, although he still has C-3PO, Chewie, Leia and Han that are all his friends. So in this movie, yes, he's obviously still going to be sad about Luke dying, but he's going to be more involved, and I want there to be a moment where him and C-3PO kind of like accept BB-8 as like one of their friends. Obviously R2 and C-3PO are an iconic duo, but BB-8 was a great character in my opinion, and I feel like the three of them could have made for some great moments, definitely some good comic relief in The Rise of Skywalker. And I also think it makes sense because, like I said about R2 still having friends before Luke came back and then ended up dying, he still has some of them. Leia's still alive, Chewie's still alive, C-3PO's still alive, and all three of them would have told him stories about the new characters like Poe, Finn and Rey, and why they're great as well, and why he should be friends with them. And no, before you say it, it's not going to be a quad friendship with Conehead, because he's clearly scared of everything, so he's not going to be a part of this just yet. But I think we get a moment where R2 and C-3PO kind of like acknowledge BB-8 as a friend. It would be really, really good to see. And it would also kind of work in a symbolic way of what some of the fandom is pushing for to happen, like the original Star Wars fans accepting the sequel trilogy, which some people failed to do. So if there's two original characters accepting a sequel character, a brand new sequel character, it just symbolizes what like should happen with the fandom. As of right now, I can't think of anything else I'd want to change about The Rise of Skywalker. However, I'm sure I've missed something. Let me know what you would change in the comments down below, and let me know if you agree with what I've decided to change in my version of The Rise of Skywalker. So with that being said, let me know if I've actually improved the movie or not. I definitely think I have. I think if this version of The Rise of Skywalker was made not too far from the story we got, but just changed enough to make it better in my opinion. Like I said, some scenes would be cut shorter, made longer that I haven't mentioned, which would make big changes to the pacing of the movie. So you have to consider that as well. But yeah, The Rise of Skywalker right now ranks bottom 2 for me. I think this one could be in my top 5 with ease. Like, The Rise of Skywalker had huge potential to wrap off the Skywalker saga, and I definitely think Colin Trevorrow's script could easily be in my top 2, but this one will take a guaranteed top 5, probably higher to be honest. I could see it being top 3. But yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching. Please do leave a like if you did enjoy, subscribe for more Star Wars content. Goodbye.